My name is Margaret Ellsworth, Maggie to those who knew me when I still believed in the goodness of family. At 64, I thought I'd seen the worst life could offer. I'd buried my husband at 52, raised my son Daniel alone, and built a successful antique business from nothing but determination and sleepless nights. I thought betrayal came from strangers, enemies, competitors. I was wrong. The night that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in October. The autumn leaves were turning gold outside my Georgian colonial home, the same house where I'd raised Daniel, where I'd planned to live out my remaining years in peace. My daughter-in-law Jessica was in the kitchen, and I could hear her voice drifting up the stairs as I prepared for bed. At first, I thought nothing of it. Jessica often took calls in the evening, usually work-related conversations from her position at the law firm downtown. But something in her tone made me pause at the top of the staircase. There was a smugness there, a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "The medications are working perfectly," she whispered into the phone, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. "She's getting weaker every day. The doctor says it could be any time now." I gripped the banister, my knuckles white against the polished wood. She couldn't be talking about me. Not my Jessica, the woman my son loved, the mother of my granddaughter. But her next words destroyed any hope of misunderstanding. "I already bought the casket and headstone," she continued with a laugh that chilled me to my core. "Got a beautiful mahogany one, expensive, but it'll look so touching at the funeral. Everyone will see how much I cared for the old woman." Old woman. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. And the best part? Jessica's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We can make her sons look like an accident too. One grieving widower, overcome with loss, takes his own life. It happens all the time. Then everything will be mine, the house, the business, the trust fund. Little Abby and I will be set for life." The phone call ended, and I heard Jessica's heels clicking across the marble floor of the foyer. I remained frozen at the top of the stairs, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just heard. She wasn't just planning my death. She was planning Daniel's murder too. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every instinct screaming at me to run to my son, to shake him awake and tell him what his beloved wife was plotting. But I knew Daniel. He was brilliant in his law practice, but blind when it came to Jessica. He saw her beauty, her charm, her way of making him feel like the most important man in the world. He would never believe his mother over his wife. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. Jessica had underestimated me, had written me off as a frail, senile old woman standing between her and a fortune. She thought she was the only one capable of planning, of manipulation, of cold calculation. She was about to learn how wrong she was. By dawn, my shock had crystallized into something far more dangerous. Purpose. Jessica wanted to play games with life and death? Fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. She was playing against a woman who had survived 64 years of this world's cruelties, who had built an empire from nothing, who had learned that sometimes the only way to stop a predator is to become something more ruthless. That morning, I watched Jessica serve me my pills with breakfast, her smile warm and caring for Daniel's benefit. She handed me the white tablets with such tenderness, such false concern. "Make sure you take all of them, Mother Ellsworth," she said sweetly. "Dr. Carrington says they're essential for your heart condition." I smiled back, equally sweet, equally false. "Of course, dear. Thank you for taking such good care of me." But I didn't swallow them. Instead, I tucked them under my tongue and disposed of them later, storing each tampered pill in a small jewelry box I kept hidden in my bedroom safe. Evidence. Documentation. Proof. Jessica thought she was writing my death certificate. Instead, she was writing her own destruction, one poison pill at a time. The game had begun, and she had no idea she was already losing. To understand the depth of Jessica's betrayal, you need to know how we got here. The woman currently plotting my death wasn't always my enemy, though I suspect she was never truly my friend. Daniel brought her home for the first time 3 years ago, on a crisp November evening much like the one when I discovered her true nature. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, tall and willowy with platinum blonde hair and the kind of confidence that turns heads in restaurants. At 28, she was 7 years younger than my son, but that wasn't what bothered me. It was the way she looked at my house. While Daniel proudly gave her the tour, pointing out family photos and telling stories about his childhood, I watched Jessica's eyes catalog everything of value. She didn't see memories in the antique furniture I'd carefully collected over decades. She saw dollar signs. Her gaze lingered on the Tiffany lamps, the Persian rugs, the oil paintings I'd acquired through my business connections. "What a lovely home," she said to me that first night, her smile perfect and empty. "Daniel tells me you built your antique business all by yourself. How ambitious of you." The pause before ambitious spoke volumes. She saw my life's work as something quaint, something to be condescended to rather than respected. Over the months that followed, Jessica worked her magic on my son. She was brilliant at it, I have to admit. She never directly criticized me or tried to turn Daniel against me. Instead, she used subtlety. A raised eyebrow when I offered my opinion on their wedding plans, a gentle suggestion that perhaps I should take it easy and let the younger generation handle things. The wedding itself was a masterpiece of manipulation. Jessica convinced Daniel they needed something intimate, meaning small enough that most of my friends and business associates weren't invited, but large enough to accommodate all of her social climbing acquaintances. I watched from the front row as my son promised to love and cherish a woman whose eyes never left the guest list of potential networking opportunities. After the wedding, the real campaign began. Jessica started small, suggesting that my bedroom was too large for one person, that perhaps I'd be more comfortable in the smaller guest room. When I politely declined, she shifted tactics. "I'm worried about you living alone in this big house, Mother Ellsworth," she said during one Sunday dinner. "What if you fell? What if something happened and no one found you for days?" Daniel, predictably, took the bait. "She's right, Mom. Maybe you should consider moving to one of those nice retirement communities. You could make friends your own age, have activities." "I'm 64, not 94, I replied coolly. "And this is my home." But the seed was planted. Every week brought new concerns about my safety, new suggestions about my future, new hints that I was becoming a burden. Jessica was patient, methodical. She understood that moving me out of my own house would take time and careful maneuvering. What she didn't understand was that I was watching her just as carefully as she was manipulating me. I noticed the way she went through my mail when she thought I wasn't looking, searching for bank statements and insurance documents. I saw how she encouraged Daniel to help me with my paperwork, fishing for information about my assets and investments. I watched her cultivate a friendship with my doctor's receptionist, always volunteering to pick up my prescriptions, always so concerned about my health. The breaking point came 6 months ago, during Daniel's birthday party. I'd organized a small gathering in the garden. Nothing fancy, just family and a few close friends. Jessica had other plans. "Surprise," she called out as a catering truck pulled up to my house. She'd hired an expensive catering company, ordered enough food for 50 people, and invited half the town's social elite without consulting me. I wanted Daniel's birthday to be extra special. The humiliation burned like acid in my throat. In my own home, I was suddenly the guest while Jessica played hostess, accepting compliments on her beautiful house and her exquisite taste in decorating. I watched her work the room like a politician, dropping hints about Daniel's successful law practice, our family's comfortable financial situation, and her own bright future. That night, after the last guest had gone and Daniel was cleaning up, I overheard Jessica on the phone with someone from the catering company. "Just put it all on Margaret Ellsworth's account," she said casually. She insisted on covering everything. You know how generous these older ladies can be when they want to show off. I'd just been forced to pay for my own humiliation. But even then, I held my tongue. I told myself that Jessica was young, that she didn't understand boundaries, that love would mature her. I told myself that my son's happiness was worth my wounded pride. I told myself many lies in those days. The final revelation of Jessica's true character came just 2 months ago. Daniel had taken Abby to soccer practice, and Jessica and I were alone in the house. She was in the living room, on what I assumed was a work call, when I heard my name mentioned. "Margaret's been acting so confused lately," she was saying, her voice full of fake concern. "Yesterday, she couldn't remember where she put her keys. Last week, she asked me the same question 3 times. Daniel's starting to worry that it might be, the beginning stages." She was laying the groundwork for my incompetence, creating a narrative of mental decline that would make my eventual illness seem natural and expected. Anyone who knew me well would have laughed at the suggestion. My mind was as sharp as ever, my memory perfect. But Jessica wasn't talking to people who knew me well. She was talking to people who would matter when lawyers started asking questions about my death. That conversation taught me something crucial. Jessica wasn't just greedy. She was smart, calculating, and utterly without conscience. She was the kind of person who could smile at your funeral while counting the money in your bank account, which meant I had to be smarter. The old Maggie, the one who believed in fairness and family loyalty, died that day. In her place rose someone harder, colder, more focused. Someone who understood that mercy was a luxury I could no longer afford. Jessica wanted to play the long game? Fine. But she was about to discover that I'd been playing longer than she'd been alive. The morning after I overheard Jessica's death threat, I stood in my bathroom staring at the small army of pill bottles lined up on the marble countertop. Heart medication, blood pressure pills, vitamins, calcium supplements, the daily ritual of a woman my age. I'd been taking these medications for years without a second thought, trusting in the familiar routine. Now everything had changed. With trembling fingers, I picked up my heart medication and examined it closely. The blue capsules looked normal, but when I opened one, I noticed the powder inside was slightly off color, more grayish than the pristine white I remembered. My calcium tablets, usually pure white and chalky, had tiny dark flecks scattered throughout. Jessica had been so clever, so patient. Rather than substituting the pills entirely, she'd been adding things to them, probably crushing up other medications and mixing them into my regular prescriptions. It would be almost impossible to detect without specific testing, and any symptoms I experienced would be attributed to my existing conditions, or simply old age. The genius of it made me sick. If I'd started feeling worse, becoming confused or weak, everyone would have assumed it was natural decline. My doctor might have adjusted dosages or added new medications, never suspecting that someone was systematically poisoning me in my own home. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She'd gotten greedy. Instead of waiting months or years for the poison to slowly destroy my health, she was accelerating the process. That phone call had revealed her timeline. She wanted me dead soon, and she wanted Daniel to follow quickly after. That impatience would be her downfall. I spent the morning researching online, learning about medication tampering and poison detection. My business had taught me to be thorough in my research. Whether I was authenticating an antique or investigating a supplier, I never acted without complete information. This would be no different. I discovered that many common household medications, when taken in larger doses or combined with other drugs, could mimic the symptoms of heart failure, stroke, or other conditions that would be expected in someone my age. Jessica didn't need exotic poisons or hard-to-obtain toxins. She just needed access to a medicine cabinet and the knowledge of what combinations would be fatal. The thought chilled me. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every time she'd helpfully picked up my prescriptions, every time she'd organized my pills for the week, every time she'd reminded me to take my medication with such caring concern, she'd been slowly murdering me. But knowing her method gave me power. I called Dr. Carrington's office and made an appointment, claiming I'd been feeling more tired than usual and wanted some additional blood work done. Helen Carrington had been my physician for over a decade, and I trusted her completely. I want comprehensive testing, I told her during my appointment. Everything: blood chemistry, toxicology screening, the works. I have a feeling something isn't right. Dr. Carrington frowned as she examined me. Your blood pressure is actually better than it's been in months, Margaret. Your heart rate is strong. Your reflexes are sharp. What makes you think something's wrong? Call it intuition, I said carefully. I couldn't tell her about Jessica's plot. Not yet. I needed proof first, documentation that would hold up in court. I'd just feel better knowing for certain. The blood work took 3 days to come back, and when Dr. Carrington called me into her office, her expression was grave. Margaret, I need to ask you some difficult questions, she began, spreading the lab results across her desk. These tests show traces of several medications in your bloodstream that you're not supposed to be taking. Specifically, I'm seeing elevated levels of digitalis, potassium, and what appears to be crushed sleeping pills. My hands clenched in my lap, but I kept my voice steady. What does that mean? In combination, these substances could cause heart arrhythmia, kidney failure, and respiratory depression. In other words, they could kill you. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but urgent. Margaret, is there any way these medications could have gotten into your system accidentally? Have you been taking anyone else's pills by mistake? Has anyone else been handling your medications? There it was, the opening I needed. My daughter-in-law Jessica has been helping me organize my pills, I said quietly. She picks up my prescriptions, sorts them into weekly containers, makes sure I don't forget to take them. She's been so helpful. Dr. Carrington's expression darkened. Margaret, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Based on these test results, someone has been deliberately poisoning you. This isn't an accident or a mistake. We need to call the police immediately. Not yet, I said firmly. I need more evidence first. Can you document all of this? Make copies of the test results? I want everything official and thorough. Of course, but Margaret. And I need you to give me new prescriptions, but don't submit them through the usual pharmacy. I'll pay cash at a different location. Jessica can't know that I'm aware of what she's doing. Dr. Carrington stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're planning something. I'm planning to survive, I said. And I'm planning to make sure she never does this to anyone else. That afternoon, I returned home with clean medications and a heart full of righteous fury. Jessica was in the kitchen, preparing what she probably thought would be one of my last dinners. How was your doctor's appointment, Mother Ellsworth? She asked with that same sweet, false concern. I hope everything is all right. Oh, you know how these checkups go, I replied, settling into my chair at the kitchen table. Dr. Carrington says I'm doing remarkably well for someone my age. My blood work came back perfect. She says I could live another 20 years if I keep taking care of myself. For just a moment, Jessica's mask slipped. I caught a flash of frustration, of calculation, before her smile returned. That's wonderful news, she said, but her voice was flat. I suppose that means you'll want to keep taking all your medications exactly as prescribed. Oh yes, I agreed. Every single pill, just the way you've been giving them to me. I wouldn't want to change a thing about our routine. She handed me my evening pills with dinner, and I performed the same charade I'd been practicing all day, tucking them under my tongue and disposing of them later. But this time, I also palmed a small digital recorder I'd purchased that morning. You know, Jessica, I said conversationally, I've been thinking about updating my will. All this talk about my health has made me realize I should make sure everything is in order. Her eyes lit up with interest. That's very prudent of you. Have you thought about what changes you might want to make? Well, I've been considering leaving everything to Daniel, of course. But then I think about you and little Abby, and I wonder if it might make more sense to set up trusts, or perhaps leave the house directly to you since you've been taking such good care of me. Jessica leaned forward, her breathing quickened. I think trusts are very wise. They protect assets and ensure everything goes exactly where you want it to go. The only thing that concerns me, I continued, is what would happen if something were to happen to both Daniel and me. God forbid, of course, but accidents do happen. Heart attacks, car crashes, all sorts of unexpected tragedies. You shouldn't think about such morbid things, Jessica said, but there was excitement in her voice now. Though I suppose it is responsible to plan for every contingency. Exactly. I'd want to make sure you and Abby were completely taken care of. You've been like a daughter to me, Jessica. I can't imagine anyone being more deserving of security and comfort. By the time our conversation ended, I had 45 minutes of recording, Jessica discussing various scenarios for Daniel's and my deaths, her voice growing more animated as she talked about managing our assets and ensuring Abby's future. To anyone listening, it would sound like a caring daughter-in-law discussing estate planning with her aging mother-in-law. But combined with the poison pills and Dr. Carrington's test results, it was something far more damning. Evidence of premeditated murder. That night, I lay in bed planning my next move. Jessica thought she was clever, thought she was untouchable. She'd spent months laying the groundwork for what she believed would be the perfect crime, the natural death of an elderly woman, followed by the tragic suicide of a grieving son. She was wrong on every count. That night, I lay in bed planning my next move. Jessica thought she was clever, thought she was untouchable. She'd spent months laying the groundwork for what she believed would be the perfect crime, the natural death of an elderly woman, followed by the tragic suicide of a grieving son. She was wrong on every count. By morning, I would begin the systematic destruction of Jessica Ellsworth. And unlike her slow-acting poison, my revenge would be swift, thorough, and absolutely fatal to everything she held dear. Before we continue with Maggie's calculated revenge, let me pause to tell you something important. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Just like Maggie discovered her own strength at 64, you too have the power to rewrite your narrative. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Now, let's see how a woman who refused to be a victim became the architect of perfect justice. The transformation from victim to predator doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, planning, and a coldness of purpose that most people can't understand. Fortunately, I'd spent 40 years in the antique business, where success depended on reading people, spotting deception, and knowing exactly when to strike. Jessica had shown me her hand too early. Now it was time to show her mine. My first move was to establish a timeline. I began keeping a detailed journal, documenting every interaction with Jessica, every pill she gave me, every conversation about my health or financial affairs. I photographed the tampered medications with a digital camera, noting dates and times. I recorded our conversations whenever possible, always with that small device hidden in my pocket or purse. But documentation was just the beginning. If I wanted to destroy Jessica completely, I needed to understand her weaknesses, her fears, her vulnerabilities. I needed to know her as well as she thought she knew me. Jessica worked at Brennan, Hale and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. She'd landed the job through connections. Her father had been a partner at a competing firm before his death, but she'd kept it through a combination of competence and ruthless ambition. She specialized in estate planning, which now seemed darkly appropriate. I made friends with Clara Monroe, a paralegal at Jessica's firm who I met at the coffee shop across the street from their building. Clara was in her 50s, divorced and lonely, the perfect source of information if handled correctly. "Oh, you're Jessica Ellsworth's mother-in-law," she exclaimed when I introduced myself during one of my carefully planned, accidental encounters. "She talks about you all the time. She's so worried about your health." "She's very devoted," I agreed, stirring sugar into my coffee. "Sometimes I think she cares more about my well-being than I do." Over the following weeks, I cultivated Clara's friendship with the skill of a master gardener. I brought her homemade cookies, remembered her birthday, listened sympathetically to her complaints about office politics. In return, she shared gossip about the firm, including fascinating details about Jessica's work life. "She's been so distracted lately," Clara confided during one of our coffee dates. "Always talking on personal calls, always checking her phone. And the strangest thing, she's been asking a lot of questions about probate law, inheritance procedures, that sort of thing." I thought it was for a client, but she seemed more interested in the timeline than the legal technicalities. "Timeline? You know, how long it takes for estates to clear, when beneficiaries gain access to assets, what happens if multiple family members die in quick succession. Morbid stuff, really." I asked her about it once, and she just laughed and said she liked to be prepared for anything. Prepared for anything. My blood chilled, but I kept my expression neutral. "She's always been thorough," I murmured. "It's one of the things Daniel admires about her." Through Clara, I learned that Jessica had been working late several nights a week, supposedly on a big case. But when I drove by the office building on those evenings, Jessica's car was nowhere to be found. She was lying to Daniel about where she was spending her time. More importantly, Clara mentioned that Jessica had been asking about the firm's document storage policies, particularly regarding personal files and computer security. She was planning something that involved covering her tracks. That gave me an idea. I waited until Jessica was scheduled for one of her mysterious late-night work sessions, then made my own visit to Brennan, Hale, and Associates. The security guard knew me by now. I'd been bringing Clara lunch occasionally, playing the role of the sweet elderly lady who doted on her new friend. "Just dropping off some of my famous apple turnovers for Clara," I told him, holding up a box of pastries. "She mentioned she'd be working late tonight." "She's not here, Mrs. Ellsworth," the guard said, accepting the box gratefully. "Left around 5 with everyone else. Though Mrs. Jessica Ellsworth is upstairs, said she had a big deadline to meet." Perfect. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where Jessica's office was located. The hallway was dimly lit, most offices dark and empty. But I could see light spilling from under Jessica's door, and I could hear her voice. She was on the phone again. I moved closer, pressing my ear to the door. "Just need a few more weeks," she was saying. "The old bat is tougher than I thought, but she's definitely getting weaker. I increased the dosage last weekend, so it shouldn't be much longer." My hands trembled with rage, but I forced myself to stay focused. I pulled out my digital recorder and held it against the door. "I know it seems like it's taking forever, but this has to look natural," Jessica continued. "If she dies too quickly, people might ask questions. Better to let it drag out a little longer and make sure everyone sees her declining health." There was a pause, then Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Trust me, by Christmas she'll be gone, and Daniel will be so devastated he won't know what hit him. A little extra something in his coffee during the funeral preparations, and I'll be the grieving widow inheriting everything. The perfect crime." I'd heard enough. Carefully, I moved away from the door and back toward the elevator. But as I passed the reception desk, I noticed something interesting. Jessica's computer was still logged in. The the screen displaying an email program. I glanced back toward her office, confirming that the door was still closed and I could still hear her voice. Then I quickly sat down at her computer. Jessica's email folders were organized with typical legal precision: client files, personal, family, financial. I opened the family folder and found exactly what I was looking for: emails to Daniel about my declining health, messages to her own mother discussing her concerns about my mental state, and most damning of all, correspondence with a funeral home about prearranged services. She'd been building her case for months, creating a paper trail that would support her version of events when I died. Every email was carefully crafted to portray her as the devoted daughter-in-law, worried sick about her husband's aging mother. But Jessica had made one crucial error. She'd saved everything. I quickly forwarded the most incriminating emails to my own account, then deleted the sent items from Jessica's computer. She'd never know they were missing unless she specifically looked for them, and by then it would be too late. I also created a new folder on her computer, buried deep in the system files where she'd never think to look. In it, I placed a document I'd prepared earlier, a detailed plan for murdering both Daniel and me, complete with timeline, methods, and financial projections. It was written in Jessica's own writing style, using phrases and terminology I'd collected from her legitimate work documents. When investigators eventually searched Jessica's computer, they'd find that hidden file. Combined with the forwarded emails, it would paint a devastating picture of premeditated murder. As I finished my work, I heard Jessica's voice getting louder. Her phone call was ending. I quickly closed all programs, grabbed my purse, and hurried toward the elevator. I was just stepping into the elevator car when Jessica's office door opened. "Oh," she called out, surprised. "Mother Ellsworth? What are you doing here?" I turned back with my best confused old lady expression. "Jessica, dear, I was looking for the restroom, and I'm afraid I got turned around. These office buildings are so confusing at night." She walked toward me, her eyes suspicious. "How did you get up here? The building is supposed to be secure after hours." "The nice security guard let me in when I said I was looking for you," I said, allowing a slight quaver into my voice. "I wanted to surprise you with some dinner, since you're working so late. But I couldn't remember which office was yours, and then I couldn't find the bathroom." Jessica's expression softened slightly. She was buying the act. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said, though her tone remained guarded. "But how did you know I was working late tonight?" "Daniel mentioned it when he got home from Abby's soccer practice. He said you'd be here until at least 10 o'clock. I stepped out of the elevator, moving closer to her. "You work so hard, dear. I worry about you pushing yourself too hard." "I'm fine," Jessica said curtly. "But you shouldn't be here alone at night. It's not safe." "You're probably right. Would you mind walking me down to my car? I'm a little nervous about the parking garage after dark." She couldn't refuse without seeming heartless, though I could see the irritation in her eyes. As we rode the elevator down together, I chattered about trivial things: Abby's soccer game, the weather, my plans for Thanksgiving dinner. "You know," I said as we reached the parking garage, "I've been thinking about what you said last week about making sure my affairs are in order. Perhaps you could recommend an attorney who specializes in estate planning? Someone from your firm, maybe?" Jessica's eyes lit up with interest. "Actually, I handle quite a bit of estate work myself. I'd be happy to help you with whatever you need." "That's very kind, but wouldn't that be a conflict of interest? I mean, since you're family and all." "Not at all," she said quickly. "I help family members with legal matters all the time. In fact, it would be an honor to handle your estate planning. I could make sure everything is structured perfectly for Daniel and Abby's future." And there it was, another piece of evidence for my growing file. Jessica was so eager to get her hands on my assets that she was willing to violate legal ethics to do it. "Well, if you're sure it's appropriate," I said uncertainly. "Perhaps we could discuss it this weekend?" I'd like Daniel to be involved in the planning, of course. Of course, Jessica agreed, though I could see her wheels turning. She was probably already planning how to manipulate those discussions to her advantage. We said our goodbyes, and I drove home with a sense of deep satisfaction. The trap was set, the bait was in place, and Jessica was walking directly into it. She thought she was the spider, and I was the fly. She was about to learn just how wrong she could be. The hardest part of any revenge is watching the people you love choose your enemy over you. For weeks after discovering Jessica's plot, I wrestled with whether to tell Daniel directly what his wife was planning. Every instinct screamed at me to shake him awake, to force him to see the truth about the woman sharing his bed and raising his daughter. But I knew my son too well. Daniel had always been brilliant but naive, trusting but stubborn. When he believed in someone, he believed completely. And Jessica had spent 3 years making herself indispensable to him, positioning herself as the perfect wife and devoted mother. More dangerous still, she'd been slowly poisoning his perception of me. I first noticed it 6 months ago, during our weekly Sunday dinners. Daniel would make small comments about my forgetfulness, or gently suggest that I might be overdoing things with the business. At first, I attributed it to normal concern for an aging parent. But as Jessica's murder timeline accelerated, so did Daniel's conviction that I was declining. "Mom, you left the stove on again yesterday," he said during one particularly painful conversation. Jessica found it when she came home from work. The kitchen could have caught fire. I hadn't left the stove on. I was meticulous about such things, had been for decades. But Jessica had been in my house that afternoon, supposedly picking up some papers for our estate planning discussion. She'd obviously turned on the burner after I'd left, then discovered it when Daniel came home. "I don't remember leaving it on," I said honestly. "That's what worries me," Daniel replied, his voice heavy with concern. "Mom, forgetting to turn off appliances, misplacing things, asking the same questions repeatedly. These could be signs of early dementia. Maybe we should schedule some tests with Dr. Carrington." Jessica, who had been listening quietly from the kitchen, chose that moment to join our conversation. "I've been worried about the same thing," she said, settling beside Daniel on the couch and taking his hand. "Last week she asked me 3 times when Abby's recital was scheduled. And yesterday she couldn't remember where she'd put her car keys." More lies, but told so convincingly, with such apparent love and concern, that even I almost doubted my own memory. "Now that you mention it," Daniel said slowly, "she did seem confused when I called her Tuesday. She asked me the same question twice during our conversation. I wanted to scream." The phone call he was referring to had been perfectly normal. We discussed his latest case and made plans for Abby's upcoming birthday party. But Jessica was rewriting history, and Daniel was accepting her version without question. "I think we should consider some changes," Jessica continued gently. "Maybe it's time to look into assisted living facilities, or at least hire a full-time caregiver. I worry about her being alone in that big house." That's when I realized the true genius of Jessica's plan. She wasn't just going to poison me and claim it was natural causes. She was creating a narrative of mental decline that would explain away any accusations I might make. If I tried to tell Daniel that his wife was a murderer, he'd chalk it up to dementia and paranoid delusions. Even if I survived her poison, she'd already destroyed my credibility. But I had to try. The following Sunday, I asked Daniel to come over early, before Jessica and Abby arrived for dinner. I'd spent hours planning what to say, how to present the evidence, without sounding paranoid or confused. "Daniel, I need to talk to you about something serious," I began as we sat in my living room. "I think Jessica might not be who you think she is." His expression immediately shifted, becoming guarded and defensive. "What do you mean?" I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, containing photos of the tampered pills, printouts of Dr. Carrington's test results, and transcripts of some of my recorded conversations with Jessica. Someone has been poisoning me, I said quietly, adding other medications to my prescriptions, trying to make it look like natural causes. And I have reason to believe that person is Jessica. Daniel stared at the papers I'd spread across the coffee table, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally anger. Mom, this is... He picked up one of the photos, squinting at the slightly discolored pills. This is insane. Jessica would never. She loves you. She takes care of you. Look at the blood test results, I pressed.
Dr.
Carrington found traces of medications I'm not supposed to be taking. Dangerous combinations that could cause heart failure. There has to be an explanation. Maybe the pharmacy made a mistake. Maybe you accidentally took someone else's prescription. Daniel was grasping for any alternative that didn't involve accepting his wife's guilt. Mom, you've been confused lately. Just last week you couldn't remember. I haven't been confused, I snapped, my composure finally cracking. Jessica has been telling you I'm confused. She's been setting things up to make me look senile and forgetful. Daniel, she's planning to kill me, and then she's planning to kill you too. The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Daniel's face went white, then flushed red with anger. That's enough, he said, standing abruptly. I don't know what's happening to you, but accusing Jessica of attempted murder is beyond the pale. She's been nothing but devoted to this family, and you're... I'm what? I challenged. Crazy? Paranoid? Senile? I don't know, he said quietly, and those 3 words broke my heart more than any shouted accusation could have. But you're not the mother I grew up with. The woman who raised me would never make such horrible accusations without proof. I have proof. It's right there in front of you. You have paranoid theories and circumstantial evidence, Daniel corrected. Mom, I think you need help. Professional help. At that moment, Jessica's key turned in the front door. She called out cheerfully as she entered with Abby, her voice warm and loving as always. Hello, darling. Sorry we're late. Abby insisted on stopping for ice cream on the way over. She appeared in the living room doorway, took one look at our faces and the papers scattered on the table, and immediately shifted into concerned daughter-in-law mode. Is everything all right? She asked, moving to Daniel's side. You both look upset. Daniel gathered up my evidence and handed it to Jessica. Mom thinks you've been poisoning her, he said bluntly. She has some test results and photos that she believes prove you're trying to kill her. Jessica's reaction was perfect, shocked hurt, followed by confused concern, and finally gentle sadness. If I had known the truth, I would have believed her myself. Oh, Margaret, she said softly, sitting down beside me and taking my hands. Honey, I would never hurt you. Your family. I love you like my own mother. Look at the evidence, I insisted. The blood tests show. The blood tests show that your medications might have gotten mixed up somehow, Jessica interrupted gently. It happens sometimes with elderly patients. Pills fall out of bottles, get confused with other prescriptions. The important thing is that we caught it before any real harm was done. She turned to Daniel, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've been so worried about her memory issues lately. This kind of paranoid thinking can be a symptom of early dementia. Maybe we should schedule an appointment with a neurologist. That's a good idea, Daniel agreed, his voice heavy with sadness. Mom, I think Jessica's right. We need to get you some help. I looked back and forth between them, my son, who I'd raised and sacrificed for, choosing to believe the woman who was planning his murder, and that woman, sitting beside me with such convincing compassion while plotting my death. In that moment, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. If Daniel wanted to choose blindness over truth, if he preferred Jessica's lies to his mother's love, then he would have to live with the consequences. I would save him despite himself, but I would never forgive him for making that choice. You're right, I said quietly, letting my voice take on a defeated, confused tone. I suppose I've been feeling muddled lately. Maybe I did mix up the medication somehow. Jessica squeezed my hands, her smile radiant with false relief. It's going to be okay, Mother Ellsworth. We'll take care of everything. Daniel and I will make sure you get the best possible care. I know you will, dear, I replied, meeting her eyes directly. I trust you completely. She had no idea that those words were a declaration of war. Daniel relaxed visibly, convinced that crisis had been averted through Jessica's wisdom and compassion. He spent the rest of the evening treating me with the careful kindness reserved for the mentally fragile, speaking slowly and clearly, double-checking my understanding of simple concepts. But I wasn't fragile. I was furious. And fury, properly channeled, is the most powerful force in the universe. After they left that night, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence they dismissed and made myself a promise. I would destroy Jessica Ellsworth so completely that Daniel would have no choice but to see the truth. And when that moment came, when he finally understood what he'd chosen over his own mother, he would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. I'd given him a chance to stand with me. He'd chosen to stand with my would-be murderer instead. Some betrayals can never be forgiven, even when they come from the people we love most. The week following Daniel's betrayal, I threw myself into planning Jessica's destruction with the focused intensity of a master strategist. My son's refusal to believe me had freed me from any lingering moral constraints. I no longer needed to protect his feelings or preserve his marriage. I could focus entirely on ensuring Jessica paid for her crimes. My research into her daily routines revealed a weakness I could exploit: Jessica's ambition. She'd been angling for a promotion to junior partner at Brennan, Hale and Associates, and that desperation made her vulnerable. I returned to my friendship with Clara Monroe, this time with a specific purpose. I've been thinking about what you said regarding Jessica's recent distraction, I mentioned during one of our coffee meetings. It must be difficult for everyone in the office when someone isn't performing at their usual level. Clara nodded sympathetically. It's been challenging. She missed 2 important deadlines last month, and Richard Hale, that's her supervising partner, was not pleased. He's been watching her more closely lately. How unfortunate. I'd hate for her work troubles to affect her chances for advancement. Between you and me, Clara whispered, leaning closer, I think she's in real danger of being passed over for the promotion. There are rumors that they're considering external candidates instead of promoting from within. Perfect. Jessica's professional insecurity would make her desperate to prove herself, which meant she'd be taking risks and cutting corners. Desperate people make mistakes, and I intended to capitalize on every single one. I spent the next week implementing Phase 1 of my plan. Using the building access codes I'd memorized during my previous visit, I began making regular nighttime trips to Jessica's office. Each visit was carefully timed, never on consecutive nights, always when I knew she was elsewhere, always with a legitimate excuse ready if caught. During these visits, I methodically planted evidence of Jessica's criminal intentions throughout her workspace. I modified documents on her computer, adding subtle changes that would raise red flags during any investigation. I planted physical evidence, printouts of poison research, handwritten notes about inheritance law, even a small vial of digitalis hidden in her desk drawer. But my masterpiece was the psychological trap I set for Jessica herself. I created a series of anonymous emails sent from untraceable accounts that began arriving in Jessica's work inbox. The first one appeared on a Monday morning. I know what you're planning. Stop now, or face the consequences. Jessica's reaction was immediate and telling. Clara reported that she'd become increasingly paranoid, constantly checking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds. She's been acting so strange, Clara confided. Last week she accused the cleaning crew of going through her desk. Yesterday, she insisted someone had been using her computer, even though IT showed no unauthorized access. The second email arrived 3 days later. Poisoning an elderly woman? You're more pathetic than I thought. How does it feel to know someone is watching your every move? This one sent Jessica into a tailspin. She began working late every night, not because she had extra work, but because she was searching her office for signs of intrusion. She installed a small camera at her desk, changed her computer passwords daily, and started carrying her most sensitive files with her at all times. The third email was the coup de grace. Check the bottom drawer of your filing cabinet. You're not as clever as you think. That afternoon, Jessica tore apart her office looking for whatever the anonymous emailer had hidden there. She found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find, but the paranoia was eating her alive. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. I had photographs of Jessica in increasingly disheveled states, recordings of her erratic behavior at work, testimony from Clara and other colleagues about her declining performance and strange accusations. But the real trap was still to come. I waited until Friday evening, when I knew Jessica would be working late again. Her paranoia had made her afraid to leave her office unattended. Then I called the law firm's main number. Brennan, Hale and Associates. This is the emergency answering service, the operator said. Oh, thank goodness, I said, letting my voice shake with carefully controlled fear. This is Margaret Ellsworth. I'm calling about my daughter-in-law, Jessica Ellsworth. She works there, and I'm terribly worried. What seems to be the problem, ma'am? She called me an hour ago, and she was talking so strangely. She said she was in her office, but she was rambling about people watching her, about secrets being discovered. She mentioned something about pills and poisons, and then the line went dead. I've been trying to call her back, but she's not answering. The operator's tone immediately became more concerned. Ma'am, are you suggesting Mrs. Ellsworth might be having some kind of mental health crisis? I don't know what to think, I said, letting tears creep into my voice. She's been under so much stress lately, and she's been saying such strange things. I'm worried she might hurt herself or someone else. I'm going to call the police and send them to the building to check on her. Can you meet them there? Of course. Please hurry. 20 minutes later, I stood in the lobby of Jessica's office building as police officers and paramedics rushed past me toward the elevators. I played my role perfectly. The concerned mother-in-law, worried sick about her daughter-in-law's mental state. When they found Jessica in her office, she was surrounded by scattered papers, her desk torn apart, her computer displaying multiple open windows of legal research about inheritance fraud and elder abuse. The combination of my planted evidence and her own paranoid behavior painted a picture of someone in the midst of a complete psychological breakdown. Ma'am, we need you to step away from the desk, one of the officers said as Jessica tried to explain about the anonymous emails and the feeling that someone was watching her. You don't understand, Jessica protested, her voice rising to near hysteria. Someone has been in my office. Someone knows about. She caught herself before completing the sentence, but the damage was done. Knows about what, ma'am? The officer pressed. Jessica looked around wildly, her eyes finally landing on me standing in the doorway with the paramedics. For just a moment, I saw understanding flash across her face. She knew, somehow, that I was responsible for this. But by then it was too late. Her erratic behavior, combined with the evidence scattered around her office, had already condemned her in the eyes of the authorities. I want to call my husband, she said finally, her voice small and defeated. That's your right, ma'am. But first we need you to come with us for evaluation. There are some concerning materials here that we need to discuss with you. As they led Jessica away, I maintained my mask of worried confusion. But inside, I was savoring the moment. This was just the beginning of her downfall, and she knew it. She'd played with my life like it was a game. Now she was learning that I played games better than she ever could. The next phase would be even more devastating. By the time I was finished, Jessica would wish she'd never heard the name Ellsworth. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, contains powerful strategies for women who refuse to be victims. Like Maggie, you have the strength to turn your pain into power, your betrayal into triumph. Don't let anyone convince you that your best days are behind you. They're not. Click the link in the description and discover how to reclaim your life today. Jessica's mental health evaluation lasted 3 days. During that time, the police investigation I'd set in motion began to gain momentum. Detective Samuel Wright, the lead investigator assigned to the case, was a thorough man in his late 40s who took elder abuse very seriously. I played my role as the concerned victim perfectly. I just can't believe Jessica would do anything to hurt me, I told Detective Wright during our first formal interview. She's always been so caring, so devoted to the family. But if these pills really were tampered with... I let my voice trail off, allowing him to draw his own conclusions about my reluctance to believe ill of my daughter-in-law. Mrs. Ellsworth, I need you to understand that what we found in Mrs. Jessica Ellsworth's office suggests a pattern of premeditated harm, Detective Wright said gently. The research materials, the notes about inheritance procedures, the evidence of medication tampering, this isn't a simple family misunderstanding. But surely there must be some explanation, I protested weakly. Jessica is a lawyer. She researches all sorts of things for her clients. And as for the medications, ma'am, we've had the pills from your home analyzed by our forensics lab. Someone deliberately added foreign substances to your prescribed medications. Combined with your doctor's blood test results, we're looking at a clear case of attempted poisoning. I allowed myself to look shocked, covering my mouth with a trembling hand. Attempted poisoning? You really think someone was trying to kill me? I'm afraid so. And the evidence points strongly toward your daughter-in-law. Daniel, of course, refused to believe it. When Detective Wright interviewed him, he insisted there had been some terrible mistake, that Jessica was being framed or that I was somehow confused about the facts. His denial was so complete that it actually helped my case. It made him look like either an accomplice or a fool, and the police quickly concluded he was the latter. Your son genuinely seems to believe in his wife's innocence, Detective Wright told me after that interview, which suggests either remarkable naivety or remarkable acting ability. Our investigation indicates it's the former. Jessica was released from psychiatric hold after 3 days, but her freedom was short-lived. Armed with search warrants, police descended on my house and hers, collecting evidence with methodical precision. They found everything I'd wanted them to find. In Jessica's home office, detailed research into various poisons and their effects, printed emails about inheritance law, and financial projections showing her expected inheritance from my estate. In her purse, a small digital scale of the type used to measure pharmaceutical powders and residue from crushed pills that matched the foreign substances found in my medications. Most damning of all, they found the hidden file I'd planted on her office computer, the one containing her detailed murder plan. Jessica's protests that she'd never seen the document before fell on deaf ears. The file had been created using her login credentials, saved in her directory structure, and written in her distinctive professional style. This is impossible, she kept saying during her second police interview. Someone planted this. Someone has been setting me up. Who would do that, Mrs. Ellsworth? Detective Wright asked. Who would have access to your office, your computer, your personal medications? Jessica's eyes darted around the interrogation room like a trapped animal's. I knew she suspected me, but she couldn't say so without sounding even more paranoid and delusional. I don't know, she whispered finally. But this isn't real. I would never hurt Mother Ellsworth. I love her. The detective placed a photograph on the table between them, One of my tampered pill bottles, the foreign substances clearly visible as dark specks in the white powder. These pills came from your mother-in-law's medicine cabinet. The foreign substances match samples found in your possession. Your computer contains detailed plans for her murder and your husband's death. Your financial records show recent purchases of funeral supplies. Detective Wright leaned forward, his voice hardening. Mrs. Ellsworth, we have enough evidence to prosecute you for attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder abuse. Your best option is to cooperate with our investigation. I want a lawyer, Jessica said, her voice barely audible. That's right. But I hope you understand the seriousness of these charges. Jessica's arrest made the local news, and the story spread through our social circle like wildfire. The consensus was shock, disbelief, and whispered speculation about what signs people might have missed. I attended every court hearing, playing the role of the heartbroken mother-in-law who couldn't understand how someone she trusted could betray her so completely. The media loved the story. The beautiful young lawyer accused of trying to poison her elderly mother-in-law for money. I gave several interviews, always emphasizing Jessica's apparent devotion to the family and my continued confusion about her motives. She seemed like such a loving daughter-in-law, I told one reporter, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. I trusted her with my life. Literally, as it turns out. Behind the scenes, I was methodically destroying any remaining sympathy for Jessica. I provided prosecutors with additional evidence, recordings of conversations where Jessica had discussed my inevitable death, financial documents showing her extravagant spending in anticipation of her inheritance, and testimony from friends and neighbors about her increasingly erratic behavior. Frank Doyle, my pharmacist, testified that Jessica had been asking unusual questions about my prescriptions, including inquiries about dosages and potential interactions with other medications. Dr. Carrington provided devastating medical testimony about the foreign substances found in my blood and their potential lethal effects. Clara Monroe, reluctantly subpoenaed, testified about Jessica's recent work performance and her strange questions about inheritance procedures. Each piece of evidence was another nail in Jessica's coffin, and I made sure the prosecutors had everything they needed to build an airtight case. But the most satisfying moment came when Daniel finally began to crack under the weight of evidence. As the preliminary hearings progressed, and witness after witness testified to Jessica's guilt, I watched my son's certainty crumble. He started missing court dates, claiming work conflicts. When he did attend, he sat in the back row, his face pale and strained. He stopped visiting me entirely, unable to face either his wife's guilt or his mother's vindication. 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Daniel appeared at my door unannounced. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hung loose on his suddenly gaunt frame. "Mom," he said quietly, standing on my doorstep like a stranger asking for directions. "I need to talk to you." I let him in, offered him coffee, and waited. He sat in the living room where just months earlier he dismissed my accusations as paranoid delusions. "I've been going through Jessica's things," he said finally. "Personal items the police didn't take. And I found..." He pulled out a small notebook, his hands shaking slightly. She kept a diary. Private thoughts, plans, observations about people. He opened the notebook and began reading in a monotone voice. "Margaret is stronger than I expected. The old bitch has more fight in her than I calculated. Need to increase dosage again. Can't afford to let this drag out much longer. Daniel is getting suspicious about the expenses." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it was almost physical. "There are dozens of entries like this. Months of planning, calculating, discussing you like you were just an obstacle to be removed." His voice broke slightly. "She wrote about me too. About how easy it would be to drug my coffee after your funeral, make it look like suicide from grief." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I chose her over you," he continued. When you came to me with evidence, when you begged me to believe you, I chose to believe her lies instead of your truth. My own mother, and I. He couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, I said simply. You did. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally for 35 years. The man who had chosen his would-be murderer over his mother when the choice mattered most. I don't know, I said honestly. But that's not what matters right now. What matters is making sure Jessica pays for what she tried to do. Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'll testify against her. Whatever you need, whatever the prosecutors need. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Too little, too late. But I accepted his offer anyway. Jessica's trial would be the final act of my revenge, and I wanted everyone, including Daniel, to understand exactly what kind of monster they'd welcomed into our family. The trial of Jessica Ellsworth began on a cold Monday morning in February. I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing my finest black wool coat and the pearl necklace my late husband had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look dignified, authoritative, a woman of substance who deserved justice. The media attention was intense. Local news crews lined the courthouse steps, and I could hear reporters discussing the case as I passed. The Black Widow trial, they were calling it, though Jessica had only been married once. The name stuck anyway. Jessica's defense attorney, Thomas Brady, was expensive and experienced. He'd built his reputation defending white-collar criminals and had a particular talent for making juries sympathize with attractive female defendants. Jessica's family had mortgaged their house to pay his fees, desperate to save her from what looked like an inevitable conviction. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Catherine Wells, a sharp woman in her early 40s who specialized in elder abuse cases. She'd reviewed my evidence with the thoroughness of a master chess player, building a case that seemed unassailable. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row behind the prosecution table where Jessica would be forced to see me. I wanted her to be reminded constantly of who had orchestrated her downfall. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, ADA Wells began. This case is about trust betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. Margaret Ellsworth opened her home to Jessica Ellsworth, welcomed her as a daughter, loved her granddaughter, and treated her with kindness and generosity. In return, Jessica Ellsworth slowly, methodically, and deliberately poisoned her elderly mother-in-law while planning to steal her fortune. Wells outlined the evidence piece by piece. The tampered medications, the financial projections, the research into poisons, the damning computer files, and the witness testimony that would prove Jessica's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. This is not a case of family disputes or misunderstandings, Wells continued. This is attempted murder for financial gain, executed by someone who took advantage of an elderly woman's trust and love. By the end of this trial, you will see that Jessica Ellsworth is not a victim of circumstance or paranoia. She is a cold-blooded killer who was stopped just short of completing her crime. Brady's opening statement tried to paint a different picture. My client is a devoted wife and mother, a successful professional, a woman with no criminal history who suddenly finds herself accused of an unthinkable crime, he told the jury. The prosecution wants you to believe that Jessica Ellsworth, with no history of violence or dishonesty, suddenly decided to become a murderer. They want you to ignore the possibility of planted evidence, of false accusations from a confused elderly woman, of a rush to judgment by overzealous investigators. But even as Brady spoke, I could see the weakness in his defense. He had no alternative theory that made sense, no explanation for the overwhelming physical evidence, no compelling reason why anyone would frame Jessica for attempted murder. The first week of testimony established the foundation of the prosecution's case. Dr. Carrington took the stand and explained, in clinical detail, how the foreign substances found in my blood could have killed me if I'd continued taking the tampered medications. The combination of digitalis, crushed sleeping pills, and excessive potassium would have caused cardiac arrhythmia leading to heart failure, she testified. Given Mrs. Ellsworth's age and existing heart condition, death would have appeared natural. Only specific toxicology testing revealed the presence of these substances. Frank Doyle, the pharmacist, testified about Jessica's unusual interest in my prescriptions and her requests for information about drug interactions. Detective Wright walked the jury through the investigation, explaining how the evidence trail led inexorably to Jessica as the only person with the means, motive, and opportunity to commit the crime. Mrs. Jessica Ellsworth had complete access to her mother-in-law's medications, detailed knowledge of her medical conditions, and clear financial motivation, he testified. She also had the legal expertise to plan the crime in a way that would minimize suspicion. But the most damaging testimony came from Clara Monroe, Jessica's former colleague. She was obsessed with inheritance law, Clara testified reluctantly, always asking questions about probate procedures, estate distribution, what happens when multiple family members die in succession. And she talked about Mrs. Ellsworth's declining health constantly, even when Margaret seemed perfectly sharp to me. Did Mrs. Jessica Ellsworth ever discuss her expectations regarding her mother-in-law's estate? Ada Wells asked. Clara shifted uncomfortably in the witness chair. She mentioned several times that she and Daniel would inherit everything when Margaret passed away. She seemed very confident about that. Confident in what way? Like it was going to happen soon. Like she was planning for it. The second week focused on the physical evidence. Forensics experts testified about the foreign substances found in my medications, the residue discovered in Jessica's possession, and the digital evidence from her computer. The prosecutor's computer expert explained how the incriminating documents found on Jessica's laptop could not have been planted remotely. They had been created and saved using her specific login credentials, at times when she was known to be alone in her office. The metadata shows these files were created over a period of several months, the expert testified. They contain detailed personal information about the victim that only someone with intimate knowledge of the family would possess. Brady tried to challenge this testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that the files could have been created by someone else with access to Jessica's office. But he couldn't explain how an outsider would have obtained Jessica's passwords, or why they would choose to frame her specifically. The most dramatic moment came when Ada Wells played the recordings I'd made of Jessica discussing my declining health and her expectations about inheritance timing. The jury listened in shocked silence as Jessica's voice filled the courtroom. She's getting weaker every day. The doctor says it could be any time now. And the best part? We can make her sons look like an accident too. I watched Jessica's face as her own words condemned her. She sat perfectly still, but I could see the tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the hopelessness of her situation. Daniel testified on the fourth day, his voice hollow and broken as he described his wife's manipulation and his own blind refusal to see the truth. She convinced me that my mother was becoming senile, he admitted. Every symptom, every confusion, every forgetful moment, Jessica always had an explanation that made my mother seem incompetent. I believed her because I loved her and because I trusted her to care for my family. Did your wife ever discuss your mother's estate with you? Wells asked. Constantly. She was always suggesting that we needed to make sure everything was properly organized for the future. She pushed for joint bank accounts, shared property titles, anything that would give her immediate access to assets when my mother died. When Brady cross-examined Daniel, he tried to suggest that Daniel was simply a bitter husband trying to blame his wife for his own guilt about ignoring his mother's needs. Isn't it true, Mr. Ellsworth, that you feel responsible for not protecting your mother and you're now trying to shift that guilt onto your wife? Daniel looked directly at Jessica as he answered, I am responsible for not protecting my mother, but Jessica is responsible for trying to kill her. The defense's case was weak and desperate. Brady called character witnesses who testified to Jessica's professional competence and community involvement. He brought in a computer expert who suggested, without evidence, that the digital files could have been planted by a sophisticated hacker. He even tried to suggest that I had somehow poisoned myself as part of an elaborate scheme to frame Jessica, though he couldn't explain why I would risk my own life for such a purpose. But Brady's biggest mistake was putting Jessica on the stand in her own defense. Jessica maintained her innocence, of course. She testified that she loved me like her own mother, that she would never harm me, that someone was framing her for reasons she couldn't understand. I know how this looks, she said, tears flowing freely as she faced the jury. But I swear to you, I did not try to hurt Margaret Ellsworth. Someone has gone to incredible lengths to make me appear guilty, but I am innocent. ADA Wells' cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Mrs. Ellsworth, you testified that you loved your mother-in-law. Is that why you purchased a casket and headstone for her while she was still alive and healthy? That was a misunderstanding. I was pre-planning. Pre-planning for what? Her death that you expected to occur soon? I didn't expect her to die soon. I was just being prepared. Prepared for the inheritance you discussed so frequently with your colleagues? I never discussed inheritance with anyone. Wells played the recording of Jessica talking to Clara about coming into money soon. Do you recognize your voice on this recording, Mrs. Ellsworth? Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. She started to respond, then stopped, then tried again, her words becoming increasingly incoherent as she realized she'd been caught in an obvious lie. The closing arguments were almost anticlimactic. Wells methodically reviewed the evidence, painting a picture of premeditated murder that the defense had failed to refute. Brady made a desperate final appeal for reasonable doubt, but even he seemed to know it was hopeless. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned with their verdict, Jessica was standing between her attorneys, swaying slightly as if she might faint. I sat perfectly still in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for justice. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, the foreman announced, "We find the defendant guilty." Jessica collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Brady put a supportive hand on her shoulder, but even he looked defeated. On the charge of elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Caroline Mercer scheduled sentencing for the following week. As the bailiff led Jessica away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one final time. "You destroyed my life," she whispered. "No," I replied quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. "You tried to destroy mine. I simply returned the favor." Justice, I reflected as I walked out of the courthouse, was a dish best served methodically, thoroughly, and without mercy. The sentencing hearing took place exactly 1 week after Jessica's conviction. Judge Caroline Mercer was known for her stern approach to elder abuse cases, having presided over dozens of similar trials during her 15 years on the bench. She was also known for her eloquence. Her sentencing statements often became teaching tools in law schools. I arrived early again, wearing the same black coat and pearl necklace I'd worn throughout the trial. Consistency was important. I wanted to project the image of a dignified woman who had survived an unthinkable betrayal with grace and strength. Jessica looked terrible. 7 days in jail awaiting sentencing had stripped away the last vestiges of her courtroom composure. Her blonde hair hung limp and unwashed, her expensive suit wrinkled from a sleepless night. More telling were her eyes, hollow, defeated, the eyes of someone who had finally grasped the magnitude of her fall. Brady had filed several motions requesting a reduced sentence based on Jessica's lack of prior criminal history and her status as a single mother. All had been denied. Judge Mercer was not known for mercy in cases involving the systematic abuse of elderly victims. Before I impose sentence, Judge Mercer began, I want to address the nature of this crime and its impact on both the victim and the community. She looked directly at Jessica, her expression stern but not unkind. Mrs. Ellsworth, you were in a position of absolute trust. The victim in this case welcomed you into her family, treated you as a daughter, provided for your child, and offered you security and love. In return, you systematically poisoned her while planning not only her death, but the death of her son, your own husband. Jessica started to speak, but Judge Mercer held up a hand. The evidence presented at trial shows a level of calculation and premeditation that is truly chilling. You researched methods of murder, purchased funeral supplies, manipulated your husband's perception of his mother's mental state, and created elaborate financial projections based on your expected inheritance. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. It was a business plan with murder as its foundation. The judge turned to address me directly. Mrs. Ellsworth, would you like to make a victim impact statement before I impose sentence? I rose slowly, smoothing my skirt and walking to the podium with measured steps. I had prepared this statement carefully, choosing each word to maximize its impact not just on Jessica's sentence, but on her psychological destruction. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and strong. Jessica Ellsworth didn't just try to kill my body. She tried to kill my mind, my reputation, and my relationship with my son. She convinced my family that I was becoming senile, that my concerns were paranoid delusions, that I could no longer be trusted to care for myself. I turned to look directly at Jessica, who was staring at her hands. She made me question my own sanity. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if perhaps I really was losing my mind, if the pills really were just mixed up, if my fears were just the confused ramblings of an old woman past her prime. Jessica looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that gave me deep satisfaction, the recognition that I had orchestrated every moment of her downfall. But I want the court to understand something important, I continued. I survived Jessica's poison, and I survived her psychological manipulation. At 64 years old, I proved that experience and determination are more powerful than youth and beauty. I may be older, but I am not weak. I am not confused. And I am certainly not a victim. I paused, letting that statement resonate through the courtroom. Jessica Ellsworth thought she could write the ending to my story. She was wrong. I write my own ending, and it does not include forgiveness for someone who tried to murder me for money. I returned to my seat, satisfied with the impact of my words. Judge Mercer nodded approvingly before addressing Jessica one final time. Mrs. Ellsworth, please stand for sentencing. Jessica rose unsteadily, Brady supporting her elbow. Having considered the severity of these crimes, the defendant's lack of remorse, and the calculated nature of her actions, this court sentences you as follows. Judge Mercer's voice filled the silent courtroom with the weight of absolute authority. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, 25 years to life in state prison. Jessica swayed, and Brady gripped her arm more tightly. On the charge of elder abuse, 10 years in state prison, to run concurrently. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, 15 years in state prison, to run concurrently. Additionally, this court orders full restitution for medical expenses, legal fees, and damages in the amount of $250,000. Judge Mercer set down her gavel with a sharp crack. Mrs. Ellsworth, you will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years of your sentence. Given your age and the nature of your crimes, this effectively means you will spend the rest of your productive life in prison. Jessica collapsed completely then, her legs giving out as the bailiffs moved to restrain her. As they lifted her from the floor, she looked at me one last time. I hate you, she whispered, her voice raw with despair. I know, I replied calmly, and you'll have 25 years to think about why. As they led her away, I felt a profound sense of completion. Jessica Ellsworth had tried to poison me slowly, methodically, thinking herself clever and untouchable. Instead, she had poisoned her own future, destroyed her own life, and guaranteed her own isolation from everything she had valued. Her daughter Abby would grow up knowing her mother was a convicted murderer. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed, her freedom gone. She would spend the next quarter-century in a cage, aging and forgotten while I lived freely in the house she had tried to steal. It was, I reflected, a form of poetic justice that would have made Shakespeare proud. Daniel approached me as I gathered my things to leave the courthouse. "Mom," he said quietly, "what happens now?" I looked at my son, this man who had chosen his would-be murderer over his own mother when it mattered most. "Now you learn to live with your choices," I said simply, "just as Jessica will learn to live with hers. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe in time we could." "There is no we anymore, Daniel. You made that clear when you dismissed my evidence and called me paranoid. Some betrayals cut too deep for healing." He nodded, tears in his eyes, understanding that this was another consequence of Jessica's poison, not just the physical toxins she'd fed me, but the emotional toxins she'd used to turn my own son against me. As I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp February air, I felt truly free for the first time in months. The woman who had tried to write my obituary was now writing her own from a prison cell. The son who had betrayed me would live with that knowledge forever. And I would continue writing my own story, on my own terms, for however many years I had left. Justice, I had learned, was not about forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it was simply about making sure the right people paid the right price for their choices. Remember, if you're ready to reclaim your power and write your own ending, our book Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain is your roadmap to transformation. Don't let anyone convince you that your story is over. It's not. Click the link in the description and start your new chapter today. 6 months after Jessica's sentencing, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and reading the morning newspaper. The headline that caught my attention was buried on page 3, "Convicted Murderer Attacked in Prison." The article was brief, but satisfying. Jessica had been assaulted by fellow inmates who had learned about her crimes against an elderly woman. Prison hierarchy, it seemed, had its own form of justice for those who preyed on the defenseless. She was recovering in the prison hospital, but the incident had earned her additional time in solitary confinement. I smiled as I sipped my coffee. Even in prison, Jessica was learning that actions have consequences. Life had settled into a new rhythm over the past months. I'd resumed full control of my antique business, expanding into online sales with an energy that surprised my competitors. At 64, I was more successful than I'd ever been, proving that survival was the best revenge of all. Daniel had made several attempts to reconcile, sending letters and flowers, even showing up at my door on my birthday. Each time, I received his offerings politely but coolly, making it clear that forgiveness was not forthcoming. He'd made his choice when it mattered. Now he would live with the consequences. The most satisfying aspect of my victory was watching how completely Jessica's life had been erased. Her law license had been revoked, her assets seized to pay restitution, her reputation destroyed beyond repair. Friends and colleagues who had once envied her success now whispered about how they'd always known something was off about her. Her daughter Abby, now 10 years old, lived with Jessica's mother in another state. The child would grow up knowing her mother was a convicted attempted murderer, carrying that shame for the rest of her life. It was unfortunate, but necessary. Jessica's poison had consequences that extended far beyond her intended victims. But my greatest victory was more personal. I had proven that age was not weakness, that experience was more powerful than youth, that a woman who had survived 64 years in this world was not easily eliminated by someone half her age. I'd also discovered something about myself that I hadn't known before. I was very, very good at revenge. The phone rang as I finished reading the article about Jessica's prison assault. It was Dr. Carrington, calling with the results of my latest blood work. "Everything looks perfect, Margaret," she reported cheerfully. "Blood pressure normal, heart function excellent. No trace of any foreign substances. Whatever you're doing, keep it up."
I intent thought you replied.
"I feel better than I have in years."
And it was true.
The stress of being slowly poisoned had been replaced by the deep satisfaction of perfect justice. I slept well, ate with appetite, and woke each morning energized by the knowledge that I had survived and triumphed. Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Clara Monroe appeared at my door, looking nervous and apologetic. "Mrs. Ellsworth, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to tell you how sorry I am about everything with Jessica. I feel terrible that I didn't see the signs." I invited her in for tea, curious about what had prompted this visit. "I keep thinking about all the things she said at work," Clara continued as we sat in my living room. "The questions about inheritance law, the comments about your health, the way she talked about money. I should have realized something was wrong." "You couldn't have known," I said gently. "Jessica was very skilled at manipulation. The thing is," Clara hesitated, then pressed on, "I found something at the office last week. A file Jessica had hidden in her desk drawer, one the police missed during their search." She pulled out a manila folder and handed it to me with trembling hands. "I thought you should see this." Inside the folder were detailed notes about my daily routine, my medical appointments, my business contacts, and my financial assets. Jessica had been surveilling me for over a year, documenting my habits and vulnerabilities with the thoroughness of a professional stalker. Most chilling were the timeline charts showing her planned escalation of the poisoning, with notations about expected symptoms and optimal dosages. She'd calculated everything: my projected death date, Daniel's expected grief period, even the timing of their move into my house. "She was planning this for so long," Clara whispered. "How could someone be so cold?" I studied the documents with professional interest. Jessica's planning had been methodical and thorough, but she'd made one crucial error. She'd underestimated her target. Some people see others as obstacles to be removed rather than human beings to be respected, I replied. Jessica saw me as an inconvenient old woman standing between her and a fortune. She forgot that inconvenient old women have had decades to learn how to fight. After Clara left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of Jessica's malice and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Even this discovery, which might have horrified another victim, only confirmed that my revenge had been justified and proportionate. Jessica had planned to destroy my life systematically and completely. I had simply returned the favor with superior skill and precision. As the sun set over my garden, I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it in a silent toast to my own survival. I thought about writing a memoir. How to Survive Your Own Murder, a guide for stubborn old women, but decided against it. Some victories were best savored privately. The doorbell rang again, and I opened it to find a young woman in her 20s holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Ellsworth? I'm Sarah Chun from the District Attorney's Office. I have some news about Jessica Ellsworth's case." I invited her in, wondering what new development could require an in-person visit. "Mrs. Ellsworth, Jessica has been attempting to appeal her conviction," Sarah explained. "She's claiming prosecutorial misconduct, planted evidence, various procedural violations. Most of it is standard desperate defense strategy. Most of it. She's also claiming that you somehow orchestrated her downfall, that you planted evidence and manipulated the investigation to frame her for crimes she didn't commit." I sipped my wine calmly. How interesting. Does she have any proof of these accusations? None whatsoever. But I wanted you to know that she's continuing to pursue this avenue, and you might be contacted by her appellate attorneys. I'm not concerned, I replied honestly. I'm a 64-year-old woman who is systematically poisoned by her daughter-in-law. If Jessica wants to claim I'm some kind of criminal mastermind, she's welcome to try convincing a judge of that theory. Sarah smiled. That was essentially our response as well. Her appeals have no merit, and frankly, they're making her look even more delusional and remorseless. After Sarah left, I reflected on Jessica's final desperate attempt to escape responsibility for her actions. Even facing 25 years in prison, she couldn't accept that she'd been outmaneuvered by someone she dismissed as a confused old woman. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at the city's finest restaurant, ordering the most expensive wine on the menu and savoring every sip. I'd earned this celebration through months of careful planning, meticulous execution, and absolute determination. As I raised my glass in another private toast, I thought about all the women my age who had been dismissed, underestimated, or written off as irrelevant. They had no idea how much power they possessed if they were willing to use it. I was living proof that the story doesn't end when you turn 60. Sometimes it's just beginning. Jessica Ellsworth had tried to write my obituary. Instead, she'd written her own. And I was the author of every single devastating word. If Maggie's story resonates with you, you're not alone. Every day, women are told they're too old to start over, too set in their ways to change, too late in life to reclaim their power. These are lies designed to keep you small and powerless. The truth is that your age is your advantage. Your experience is your weapon. Your survival skills are finely honed tools that younger people haven't had time to develop. You are not a victim. You are a force to be reckoned with. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, contains the strategies and mindset shifts that women like Maggie use to transform betrayal into triumph. Whether you're dealing with family dysfunction, workplace discrimination, or any situation where someone has underestimated you, this book will show you how to reclaim your narrative and write your own ending. Don't spend another day accepting less than you deserve. Don't let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Click the link in the description box right now and order Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. Your transformation starts today. Remember, revenge is a dish best served with wisdom, patience, and perfect execution. And women of a certain age? We have all three in abundance. Like this video if you believe in the power of calculated justice. Subscribe for more stories of women who refuse to be victims. And share this with any woman who needs to remember that age is not weakness, it's weaponized wisdom. Your story isn't over. It's just getting to the good part.